Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by the New York Times bestselling author of over a dozen books of fiction, including Gangsterland, which was a finalist for the Hammett Prize, The House of Secrets, which he co-authored with Brad Meltzer, and Living
Meltzer.
Dead Girl, which was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. His newest novel, which just came out a few days ago, Only Way Out, of which Publishers Weekly said, with comic flair, shocking violence, and a capacity for surprise, this recalls the noir-tinged films of the Coen brothers. That's right, your favorite writer of mine, Tod Goldberg. Todd, how the heck are you?
I'm doing good. I'm having a good day today. So
Yeah,
far,
you told me you've been doing a lot of you've been busy.
I've been busy. I've been doing a lot of media interviews today, and then my OnlyFans is jumping off. Let me tell you,
Good.
like the subscriptions this week to go along with the book, people
That's
want
how
to
you
see
do it.
this. You know what I'm saying?
That's how
People
you got to
love a
do it.
middle-aged Jewish dude in a replacements t-shirt privately.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't want to make that known to everybody, but yeah, they'll
No.
definitely pay for some good stuff. So obviously this is
Yeah.
the new book, just technically came out. I mean, it was a Kindle first read, so
Right.
people were reading it a month ago, but technically it just was released actually 3 days ago. So congratulations on the new release.
Thank
And
you.
actually the other day I just picked up the recent Best American Mystery and Suspense, guest edited by Don Winslow, and you have a story in this. So congratulations on that too. We
I
might
do.
have time to get to that. But
Yeah, in fact, I adapted the story into a part of the novel, in fact.
oh
So
wow, okay,
I changed the point of view, I changed a bunch of details, but I really liked the character that was in that short story, and I knew that I wanted a character like that in the novel. And then I was actually having a conversation with my brother Lee, also a writer, and he had read that short story, and he was like, that would be a really good sort of standalone chapter. I was like, yeah, I've been trying to figure out how to write a character like that in a new book. He's like, well, why don't you just use the short story? And it was like the sun had set upon me. I was like, oh yeah, I guess I'm in charge. I can do whatever I want.
yeah. Well, we're definitely going to get to the new book, and if we have time, to the short story. But there's a lot to go over because you've been a very busy man. Obviously, you mentioned your brother Lee Goldberg is another writer. He had also worked a lot in TV. Have you ever done anything in TV film?
Well, today's a good day to ask that question, in fact, because
Okay.
today was just announced that a TV show that I'm working on with Brian Koppelman and David Levine, the guys who created Billions, a show that takes place in Vegas, executive produced also by this hot new filmmaker named Martin Scorsese, has been greenlit at Netflix. So I'm working on that literally as we speak. So
Bad.
that just got announced as a show is going to be made. So yeah, and then I've adapted the Gangsterland series, and someone else owns Gangsterland right now that I'm not allowed to talk about contractually. But I spent a couple years adapting the Gangsterland series for Amazon. Um, and right before the pandemic, unfortunately, they ended up turning it around, but that's okay because you got a great deal where it is now. But I had a great experience doing that. So I've sold a tremendous amount of stuff to Hollywood that has never been graced by a craft services table.
Yeah.
So they
Well, I
just give me
mean,
the money and don't shoot it.
the majority, I mean, very few stuff gets optioned, and of what does get optioned, a very like small sliver actually goes into production, and that's not even a
Right.
guarantee. Like,
Correct.
I'm sure you know Jordan Harper. I've always used his
Hmm.
example where, he was a showrunner for the LA Confidential at CBS. They shot a pilot. God knows how
Yeah.
many millions of dollars they spent on a pilot.
And a
That was a
good
great
pilot. You
pilot
can
too.
watch it.
I'm sure you may have seen it. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
great. It was very dark though for CBS. I understand why they didn't go with it. It would have been probably been better on like FX or something.
Yeah.
But how much did they
FX is a
spend
good
on that?
network. I
And then
think FX does good stuff, Robert. That's all I'm saying.
so well, yeah, if we have time, we'll. But I mean, yeah, they didn't pick it up. So it's like
Right.
even stuff that gets into, that gets like a pilot made, or like,
Right.
you had Warner Brothers kill that one, Batgirl movie and stuff just for a write-off. So
Yeah.
it's a crazy business.
It is. And the nice thing for me is that having been in this industry for a long time, my first book came out 25 years ago. And I've sold, probably a dozen things to Hollywood over the years. And when I was young and impressionable, I thought everything that I sold was going to get shot and it was going to win an Academy Award. Now, unless I'm actually working on it myself, as part of the deal, I sort of separate myself out from it. It's a part that is beyond my control. And part of the reason I started writing novels instead of writing screenplays, it was always my passion to write novels, is that issue of like, I'm God. I get to decide what the budget is. I can blow up entire city blocks if I want to. Um, but what's happened in the last few years, but particularly with my Gangsterland series, is, I felt very connected to those books and I thought that they were an important part of my career. And I didn't want a show to be made of that without my involvement. And so that has sort of changed my point of view on things. And then what I'm working on now, the show that just got greenlit today, that came about because of other projects of mine that had been optioned, and Brian and David, were aware of me and had read my books and stuff too. So, there's some magic, some alchemy that's involved with all this stuff as well. But most of the time, the great thing about writing books is I'm pretty confident if I write a book, I'm going to go sell it. I don't have to worry about that too much anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean it's true. You sell something to Hollywood, to TV. It's not a guarantee. I mean, I know that
Right.
there's a lot of well-paid screenwriters out there who have never had anything and probably will never have anything even made.
Yeah,
Which,
a ton. Yeah.
you're paying the bills. It's great. At the same time, it's got to be a little demoralizing to know
Yeah.
that you're working on all these things, never comes out. So yeah, when you write a novel, even if you end up having to self-publish it, it's going to get out there. Readers are going to see it.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
well, let's go back to you mentioned, 25. So, like, do you remember the very first thing creative that you would have done? I don't know, like in elementary, middle, high school, college, like of a short story, poem. I mean, anything that really sticks out to you where you felt like was the seed that really kind of got you where you are now.
Well, a couple things. The important thing is I come from a family of writers. So, in addition to my brother, my mother was a journalist for many, many years, wrote books about divorce because she'd done that quite a bit. My dad was a TV news journalist. My uncle is a writer. My cousins are writers. So, the idea of being a writer was never sort of a foreign concept. My brother's 9 years older than me, and by the time he was 19, he already had a book deal, which is some big expectations to meet in the family, right? The difference though is that as a child I was profoundly dyslexic. I didn't learn to read until I was about 10, um, and you'd think that would have stunted sort of my desire to have narrative, but it didn't. What I remember most clearly is I would take all of my Star Wars action figures. And if you're watching this on video, you can see some on the shelves there. I would take my Star Wars action figures and I would lay them across my bedspread, and I would have these elaborate stories with my action figures, or with my Army Men, or my G.I. Joe, or whatever it might be. And at night, I would take the bedspread off my bed and I'd lay it flat on the ground, away from where the dog was, so that I could pick up the story the next day and lay it back on my bed. And when I think about that now, it seems a little crazy. But I was essentially writing a book with my toys my entire period of time when I couldn't read. And then as soon as I was able to read, I began to voraciously consume books and to write a ton. So I don't remember a time when I could write when I wasn't writing, because there
What
was
were you
so
reading
long when I couldn't
at that
write.
time?
I'm sorry?
What were you reading like around that time? Do you remember that type of books?
Yeah, I know exactly the types of books. So, as I mentioned, Lee, my brother, is 9 years older than me. And when he went off to college, he left me bags of books. And those books were the history of American crime fiction, essentially. He left me Don Westlake and Elmore Leonard and Jim Thompson and, writers like that. But he also left me like The Destroyer and any book that Mac Bolan was on. So I had 100 crime novels that were essentially my young adult literature because of course they're very simply written. The pulps were, and so reading those when you just sort of were able to consume narrative was actually pretty easy. So I read a lot of that. The book that had the most profound effect on me as a kid. And I've told this story before, so listeners, if you've heard it before, you can go get a Coke or something. Is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, which the Walnut Creek Library wouldn't let me check out when I was 11 years old. They said it was too adult for me, so I stole it. I still have the stolen copy. I could walk in the other room and get it for you if you like. But that book altered my reality. It was the first time I had seen um, violence that was in a way honorable. It was the first time I cried while reading a book. And because I had grown up in Northern California, it was also the first book that I'd read that took place in places I'd been, which is sort of unusual when you're a kid. You're reading Hardy Boys or something. You're not wherever the Hardy Boys were. And so Of Mice and Men, I think, was really sort of a profound experience for me. And when you think about it, it's Of Mice and Men, not unlike The Great Gatsby in ways, really a noir novel. There's a femme fatale, there's a bad guy, there's a bunch of violence, there's a nihilistic view of the world, all of these things abutting the dream of tending to the rabbits and all that, an unreachable dream. And so that appealed to me from a very early age. But it also inspired me for the rest of my life.
Yeah. So, did you want to? I mean, what was the very first thing you started working on? Some writers start immediately trying to write a novel, and some start with short stories. I mean, you mentioned Lee. Obviously, you had a brother who had been published very early on, so you were aware that, if you wanted to write a book, kind of the process of going through that. I'm assuming he probably would have shared that with you, getting,
Right.
if you need an agent, whatever else. I mean, what was the ultimate plan, kind of early on?
I cut my teeth on short stories. I wrote a ton of short stories. So I went to college and I majored in English with a minor in frat boy. So I wasn't terribly prolific in my college years, other than drinking bad beer and disappointing women. Um, until about, my junior and my senior year of college, I really started to write on a more serious level, and I began writing short fiction. And so I graduated college in 1994, and by 1996, I had probably published about 10 short stories. So I began publishing almost immediately after graduating from college. I started sending out stories to literary magazines and things of that nature, and pretty quickly started losing awards and things like that. Um, and I worked under this wonderful man. He was my mentor, a gentleman named Tom Filer, who he lived on Peter Graves' property in Santa Monica Canyon in a guest house in Peter Graves' property. So you'd go and you'd take this class at Tom's house. You'd pull up, and Peter Graves would be pulling down his garbage cans, and he'd yell at you. You're like, "Don't park there. That's where I put my garbage cans." And you'd be like, "Well, that's a weird experience. Peter Graves just yelled at me about garbage." Um, but he really sort of instilled in me a work ethic of like really writing a lot of short stories and trying them on as outfits, essentially, different voices, different styles, different things that I wanted to do. And so I wrote and published, probably 30 or 40 short stories between 1995 and 1999, I would guess. And then at the same time, I started working on a novel in 1998. Um, I was 27 years old, and I thought that I was late, which is absurd in retrospect. But I wrote that first novel, and I got very lucky and sold it, and then sold the film rights to Miramax at the same time, for a movie that never got made. But it was supposed to be a vehicle for Cameron Diaz. She had just come off Something About Mary, and Miramax had bought this book for her. But that
And
sort of
I'm
set
sorry,
me off on
which
my
novel was
career.
this?
It was a novel called Fake Liar Cheat.
And is that so you had started reading, you said a lot of crime, but
Hmm.
then in college, I'm assuming because MFA programs for the longest time, and they kind of still are very more quote unquote literary minded, where they don't want you really kind of playing in genre. Were you writing any type of crime stuff at the time, or was it more literary, but the literary that also kind of like skewed crime?
Everything I've ever written has had a crime angle. There's some
Yeah.
sad literary fiction that I've written, but I hadn't gone to graduate school yet. And in fact, I didn't go to graduate school in creative writing until I was hired to start an MFA program, um, an MFA program that accepts genre fiction because it's not 1974 and I'm not John Cheever. you can write whatever the fuck you want. No 19-year-old right now wants to read Cheever or write it. They want to read Hunger Games and Maze Runner and write that, or whatever the equivalent is now. Kristen Hanna book or whatever. Trying to impress upon young people what they can and can't write is so silly and so aggravating. But that's why I started my own MFA program. But I didn't have an MFA. I went and got one because I was going to start the MFA program at UC Riverside. But everything I wrote always had someone always died
Yeah.
in my stories. In my first book, I didn't realize I was writing sort of a classic noir novel at the time, but I was. It was essentially everything I've ever done has had a pretty significant criminal element to it.
Yeah. So, okay, so you published that, sold the movie rights, which again is huge. That doesn't always happen for a lot of writers, especially
Right.
first time novelists. And then had you already been working on book two, or is it one of those things you just wanted to focus on book one and see what happened? Because I know that can be very, that they call it a
Right.
sophomore slump, which I don't necessarily agree with. I mean, sometimes it happens, but did you, or I'm assuming again, your brother Lee probably told you, you just have to keep working on a new thing because there might be pressure then, once you have a book come out, if it does really well, all of a sudden you're
Right.
like, oh shoot. So like, what was the next step?
I don't remember exactly when I started to write the second book. It must have been either right before the first book came out or right after. This is 26 years ago. So it's hard to remember. The second book came out in 2002. Um, and I did the only pressure I felt was to be better. The first book wasn't good. It was not a very good book, and it got the reviews that it deserved. It wasn't a great book. It was popular, but I didn't get good reviews, and that stung me. And I recognized that I had sort of misappropriated my own talents, if that makes any sense. I wasn't writing the kind of book I wanted to read. I was sort of writing the kind of book that I thought other people would want to read, and I think that's a big mistake. Like, first, entertain yourself. First write from a place of joy for the thing that you're doing. And so I wrote that second book, either right before it came out or right after, and sold it pretty quickly to a different publisher. The first book came out from Simon and Schuster. The second book came out from Soho Press, and it was a different kind of book. It was a crime novel, also called Living Dead Girl. And what that book did was it actually sort of altered the trajectory of my career because although it didn't sell as well as the first book, it was hugely well received. It was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize. It got all this wonderful press. And I recognized that I was at a point in time in my life where, at least at that point, where my talent and my ambition had caught up to each other. It would be a little while before that happened again. But at that point, it felt like, oh, that's the book I wanted to write. I actually achieved the thing that I wanted to do. And so that was very gratifying.
So are you, and I always hate the term plotter and pantser, but that's kind of, standard now. So like how do you typically approach like when you're writing your very first novel, were you trying to outline it? And if so, was it more of like a Jeffrey Deaver spending, months doing like 100-page outline, or were you just kind of going with that initial concept or character and going from there? And then has that changed over the years? I mean, leading up to the new book?
Um, I know the plot, but I don't write it out really. I'll give you a good example. Hold on, let me open this drawer here. You can see this, which is take a lot of notes. So if you're listening to this at home, uh, I'm holding about 25 pages of lined post-it notes that I yanked from my desk. So I take a lot of notes, but I always start with a character first, a character in a setting. I come from sort of a classic school of thought that setting begets character, and so I'm always interested in people being influenced by the places that they've come from. And so that's probably why I've written a lot about the desert because I'm interested in desert people, and how we choose to live in a place that's prepared to kill us at any given time. Um, so I always know where the story is going to go. I know the ending before I sit down to write it. And so more often than not, I'm just sort of sitting around thinking about a book for several months, 3 or 4 months before I actually sit down to write it. Or in the case of, the next book I'm going to write, it's an idea that I've had for a really long time that I haven't felt prepared to write. Like I didn't know enough about the thing that I wanted to write about. I didn't feel like my talent was yet in a place where I could write the book that I now have to write and want to write and have sold. Um, and so a lot of that though comes with the experience of having done it in the past. Starting out, I flew by the seat of my pants a lot, um, and and that ended up being more of a triage situation at the end than a rewrite. Now, my process is pretty simple, which is that I write when I'm working on a novel. I'll work 4 or 5 hours a day, and every day I'll start the day by rewriting the previous pages, and that keeps the book sort of as a living rewrite the entire time. And so that way, when I get to the end, it's already gone through drafts. You just don't recognize it. And doing any edits and rewrites, which of course are going to be, is not, a huge amount of heavy lifting. It's more about fixing plot issues than it is about fixing writing issues. Um, and so, I think what I tell my students often is, you know, make sure you actually know what it is you're writing about. I'm not saying know the plot, but know what it is you want to say. What it is you're trying to get across to the reader. And it turns out that for me, I've written a lot about identity over the years, and I didn't know this until someone pointed it out, and I was like, oh, yeah, I guess I do that. Um, and so knowing sort of what I'm obsessed by allows me to, I think, better conceptualize my plots in my head, and sit down to write them. But I'm a different writer than I was 25 years ago. I used to stay up till 4 o'clock in the morning, writing all night and drinking coffee and all that. And now it's like, if I can stay awake long enough to see Drive-By Truckers and Jason Isbell on Colbert last night, it's a victory.
Yeah. So there's a lot more to go over, man. You've had a very storied career so far, and it's still going. How about the Burn Notice books? How'd those come about?
Matt Nix, the creator of Burn Notice, is an old friend of mine. He had gone to college with my oldest and dearest friend, and we met when we were both in college. And Matt had just completed the first season of Burn Notice, and he had a deal to turn the books into, or turn the show into a series of novels for Penguin, and they were doing that a bunch for the USA shows at the time. So my brother, in fact, very successfully he had written on the Monk show, and then he turned the Monk show into like 15 best-selling novels over the course of a very long time. Um, and so they wanted to replicate that with Burn Notice, and Matt said, "I'd like Tod to be the guy that does it." And I remember very vividly, we sat down. I hadn't seen him in years, but we had sort of kept track of each other's lives the entire time. And we went and met for coffee in LA one day, and he's like, "Hey, man, have you been watching the show?" And I said, "Yeah, I love the show. It reminds me of like an Elmore Leonard novel." He's like, "Yes, that's exactly it." And I was like, he's like, "Could you turn that into a books that are sort of like Elmore Leonard books?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." He's like, "Great." And that was it. So, I wrote those books very, very quickly. I wrote five of them in 3 years. And what I can tell you is that it was an important part of my career because I had recognized that I wanted to write more commercial crime fiction. I was writing sort of what, folks were, kind of calling literary crime at the time, which just means I had long sentences. And the books that I was writing weren't very funny, and I knew that I wanted to be funnier. That I was stopping myself from being funny in my other books. And in writing the Burn Notice books, I had to replicate Matt's very distinctive voice of the show and do it in a book. And if you'd written a lot of spec scripts, which a lot of us did, that it used to be if you wanted to write TV, you would write spec episodes of already existing shows to use that as a way to try to get a meeting on a different show. It was a weird weird business plan. But anyway, if you'd done that a little bit, like you were used to sort of mimicking the voice of a showrunner in the past. And so that's sort of what I did when I was writing those books and then put my own sort of spin on it. Um, and it taught me to write for a much broader audience, a bigger audience, without sacrificing the things that I like to do. I could write funny, I could write violent, I could write compelling mysteries, and I could write something that wasn't necessarily a whodunit, but a howdunit, which is more interesting to me because I don't really write heroes. You know, I typically write about bad people doing bad things to worse people, and Burn Notice allowed me to really learn how to do that on sort of a big scale.
So when you're writing someone else's IP, for people who don't know, intellectual property, obviously you're playing in their sandbox. You have to play by their
Mhm.
rules. Like were there specific things where you just, I mean, obviously you couldn't really kind of go off and do your own thing, or I guess the question is, how much freedom did they give you on these books?
A lot. Matt gave me a ton of freedom. Matt was a great partner on this because he said, "I trust you. Don't cut off Michael's hand. You know, don't kill Fiona. Because the books aren't canon, as it were, but they need to be evergreen. And so as the show went on over the time that I wrote it, I didn't add in a lot of the sort of extra characters that came along. There was a character that came in, I think it was like the middle of the fifth season or something like that, named Jesse. That was sort of another part of their Scooby Gang. And I was writing the last book, and I was like, I feel like if I put him in a book, it's not evergreen. Evergreen is Michael, Fiona, and Sam, and I want to keep it to that. And Matt was great with that. He was like, "Hey, do whatever it is that you want to do, and introduce new characters and all that." So the real advantage I had was I would sit in the writers' room as they were beating out the season, and then I would know what they were going to do before I would go write the books. So sitting in with the writers, and just being able to hear them talk and understand their logic was a really important part of me writing those books, but also replicating the voice.
Interesting. So you were actually in the writer's room
Yeah,
during that process. Do you know, well, obviously Lee had written on Monk, so obviously he was very close. I talked to a lot of writers who often do mostly novelizations of movies, which obviously are completely different than
hmm
shows that are ongoing. So it's interesting to hear that you were actually in the writer's room. Huh.
yeah.
Um,
And Matt wanted me involved because he didn't want, because it's a show that is based on cons and heists. He didn't want me replicating what he was doing,
oh,
and he
right.
didn't want to replicate what I was doing. And so it was important for us to sort of also just know what everyone was going to do. There was only one time where I think they took something from one of the books because it was a good heist, and it was a bank robbery that I had figured out, and Matt was like, "Oh, I like that." Um, so but it was really a good experience because Matt is so great. I mean, Matt Nix is just a wonderful guy. There's not a lot of amazing people that you're going to meet in Hollywood. Oftentimes, they're exactly what you think they're going to be. And Matt is the salt of the earth, just a wonderful, wonderful guy.
Yeah. So I want to get to the new book, and also I want to talk about Gangsterland because I know you said those books obviously are very important to you. Before that, though, what can we talk a little bit about the collaboration you did with Brad Meltzer, the House of Secrets, kind of like how
Sure,
that came
of course.
about?
Yeah. So, oh, my dogs are barking. Sorry, listeners. That someone, Navy SEALs might be attacking the house. Oh, it's the FedEx man. Um, so Brad actually came to my brother because my brother at the time was working with Janet Ivanovich. They had very successfully done a couple of books together, and Brad wanted to talk to Lee. Brad and Lee had known each other already about like what that process was like, and how did he enjoy it, and did it work, and was it fruitful for everybody? And said to Lee, like, I'm looking for someone that's really strong with character work that can help. And Lee was like, have you ever read my brother's stuff? And Gangsterland had just come out. And so Brad read Gangsterland, liked what I was doing in that book, and contacted me and said, "Hey, I want to start writing books with other people." And he's done this very successfully subsequently also with his children's books and his nonfiction. Um, is this something you'd be interested in? And I was, of course, and I was a fan of Brad's work. I'd read lots of his books previously. And so, we spent several weeks together, sort of just figuring out like what we wanted to write about, and what my strengths were and what his strengths were, and how we would go about it. But it was a challenge. I think Brad and I both underestimated how hard it is when you haven't written a book with someone else to write a book with someone else.
Yeah, because you had never
It's
collaborated before, correct?
no, no, and
Right.
neither had he, other than making TV shows and the like. So it took us a while to sort of get our rhythm, but once we figured out how to also argue, not that we fought a lot, but it's two writers who have different styles. How do you decide, like, who? I don't want there to be an adverb in that sentence. What are you going to do to, you know, to make your point come across so that it's not like, hey, stop writing fucking adverbs. And so I remember, like, late in the, not late, but a couple months into the process, where we finally just had a conversation where I was like, hey, we got to talk about what we don't like, what each other does, and then stop doing that, because we kept rewriting each other over and over again. And so that was very fruitful. The advantage that Brad and I had in working together is we have a very similar sense of humor, very dark. And we're the same age. We have all the same cultural references. Um, and we both don't take ourselves very seriously. The hard thing for me is I don't write conspiracy thrillers. And the hard thing for him is he doesn't write, hitman novels. And so combining those two, Reese's peanut butter cup skill sets into one book that his fans would really like, but that also appreciably did the things that he wanted to do, which was have more character investment, and which I wanted, which was really learn how to plot a big commercial novel. Figuring out how to do that, I think, was the harder part of it than we thought it was. But it was a great experience for me. It changed my life. Working with Brad changed my life. He's like a brother to me. And I learned so much more about sort of the bigger business of publishing than I had experienced. My books had always sold well, but they hadn't sold like Brad's. And to be in his shoes and experience what he was experiencing, even just from the level of doing media stuff, which was just starting to happen for me because of the success of the Gangsterland books, really opened my eyes to, what the next 10, 15, 20 years of my career could look like. So I loved working with Brad. And, we both have the champagne problem of being too busy to do it again. He's putting out a thriller every 18 months, and then he's doing the nonfiction books with Josh Mensch every year, and the children's books, and the cartoon on PBS. So he has the Brad Meltzer industrial complex, and I'm putting out a book every 18 months also, and running an MFA program and writing for television, and so trying to figure out a way that we could collaborate again. I think we're going to both have to be living in an assisted living facility before we have the time.
All right. Before we get to Gangsterland, before I forget a question. So earlier today, I was talking to a friend of mine, Joseph Dagnice. He's a crime writer, ghostwriter, and I mentioned I was going to be doing a live stream with you, and he said, "Oh, he's like Todd. He's like I've been meaning to email him because he had a question, and he was like, can you just ask him?" So I'm gonna
Yeah. Okay,
ask you
I'm
here
ready.
live. Well, he said, I guess he wasn't sure if he had read this in an interview you had done or heard a podcast or whatever, that you would do like a writer's retreat, but the writer's retreat consisted of your wife just dropping you off at some random crappy motel and leaving you behind. So you were basically stuck, just forced to write.
No,
Not you? All right.
not me.
It does sound like a good writer's retreat though. I don't know about you. It's
It
always
sounds like
like
The
being in the
Shining.
home where you have like, you
No,
have like your
no,
access to TV and internet can be very distracting.
no. That sounds horrifying to me. I'm a person like what you see right here is where I want to be. I have access to all the world's music. I have an amazing espresso machine in the kitchen. I have all the chocolate covered almonds I could eat. Like it's perfect. I'm not one of those people that can go and like sit in a Starbucks and write. I can't do that. Or be on a
Yeah.
plane and write. I want to be at my desk doing my job. Um, and I've never had a problem where I needed to be separated from my real life to get something done. And this is the advantage of having a wife who's also a writer, which is she understands if I'm sitting here staring out the window and listening to loud music, that doesn't mean I'm not working. It means I just haven't typed anything yet.
Yeah.
So no, she never had to drop me off at a hotel anywhere, though that does sound vaguely noirish, and maybe I'll start telling people I do that. I like this idea.
So, well, when you are typically writing on a book, like when you are, you've started chapter one and you have a deadline in place. You mentioned before you're doing about like 4 or 5 hours a day. Do you try to have a certain goal in mind, like a chapter a day or so many thousands of words? I mean, like, or is that
No,
just
not
like
really.
a base, it varies.
Yeah, it always varies. I'm not one of those people who's tracking the number of words they write every day. That would make me crazy. Um, I'm happy. Like if one day I get 10 pages and one day I get a paragraph, well, great. That paragraph I hope is good. But I'm also one of those people that, I don't believe in writer's block. I don't concede that it exists. Because only writers have this. No one, like your toilet repairman isn't like,
And
can't
that's
fix
what
the
Harlan
toilet.
Coben says. Plumbers
Yeah.
don't get plumber's block.
Yeah, well, it's true. Or like I'm a jockey. Like can't ride the horse today. I got jockey block. Can't do it. Like it is a thing that we as artists apply to ourselves when, for whatever reason, we can't figure out how to write the thing that we want to write. So you have to learn how to force yourself into it. The muscle memory of writing is important. And so, if there's a day where the writing isn't going well, I go out into the world. I listen to people, or I read a book, or I watch TV, or whatever. But really, the thing that always helps me the most is, if I'm feeling stuck on something, walking around and sort of retuning my brain a little bit, invariably fixes the problem. Or going to bed, going to sleep really helps. But I love to eavesdrop, and so if I'm feeling really stuck, I'll go to Target and I'll get a coffee at the Starbucks in the Target, and I'll just wander around Target for like 45 minutes listening to you people talking about your problems. And I find that extraordinarily inspiring because people reveal all kinds of stuff when you just are listening in on their public, it's legal conversations. I find that turns it all on for me. But the other side is I can't be precious. This is my job. And if I'm precious, I'm never going to write anything. I'm going to miss every deadline that I've ever had. Um, and I've been lucky. Over 25 years, I've published 16 books, and also two travel books I wrote very early in my career. Also, so in 25 years, I've published 18 books, and the way to do that is to do it. It's ass and chair time. And it's not waiting for inspiration. It's knowing how to cue inspiration to you. It's tricking yourself into doing things. And a lot of that I think comes from the rewriting every day. Because if I'm going in and looking at something that I wrote yesterday, it's turning my mind back on and I can get rolling with what I want to do without trying to figure out, oh, where was I when I left off? But the other thing, and this is maybe more helpful to the listeners that want to write, is a piece of advice that I got from Donald Westlake a million years ago. So I was a big Donald Westlake fan, as you probably are as well. And this was 2005, 2006. I'd written a book I couldn't sell, and I was interviewing Donald Westlake at the LA Times Festival of Books, which to me was like they asked me to interview Jesus. It's like, oh, yes, I will absolutely interview Jesus. That seems great. And for whatever reason, he took a shine to me, and we spent the day walking around, hanging out, and talking, which was amazing. And then that evening, we went to this party, and he and I and my brother, we sat around talking about, him writing grifters, and all, it was like getting a master's degree in crime from your hero while also eating a churro and walking around a book festival. So the dream, basically the dream. But I was having this existential crisis. I'd written a book and I knew it wasn't very good, and I was right, couldn't sell it. And I said to him, how do you know when a scene is good or when a scene is done? Or how do you know when a chapter is done? Or how do you know when your book is done or a story is done? Because I'm having a really hard time finishing things, and I'm having a hard time sort of understanding what the audience wants. And he said a very simple thing to me, which I have used as my, you know, lodestar ever since, which is he said, I know a scene is done, I know a chapter is done, I know a story is done, I know a book is done when the reader could write the next page. And it was just such a simple piece of advice, but also filled with a lot of craft. It's like, right, if you're out of surprises, then the reader is going to know what's going to happen next, and you've written yourself into a corner. And so if you keep surprising yourself page by page, scene by scene, chapter to chapter, the reader's going to be off balance, and you're going to be able to write a more compelling piece of work that way. And that really made a profound difference on how I approach those things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really I had not heard that story before of his advice. Yeah, that's really cool. Uh, so our time is getting a little bit limited here. So, Gangsterland. When you wrote Gangsterland, had you initially saw it as going to be a standalone, or did you know that there would potentially be other books?
Well, I had originally written it as a short story. So I wrote a short story called Mitzvah that appeared in Las Vegas Noir, one of the Akashic Books anthologies. And that came out in 2009, I think. And as soon as I wrote that story, I was like, oh, there's something more here. And I had written a short story about this guy's last day on the job as a fake rabbi, as a hitman hiding out as a rabbi in Las Vegas. And I finished the story and I was like, wow, there's a lot here that I could write. I really feel inspired by this. But I didn't know enough about being a rabbi to sit down and write a novel. And I knew that if I wanted to write a book about a hitman who has to hide out as a rabbi, I had to know what a rabbi would know. And so I spent the next 2 years reading all the holy books. So I read the Talmud, I read the Torah, the Midrash, I read a bunch of books on Jewish eschatology. I did nothing but read for 2 years. I didn't write another book. I just read. And when I started to write the book, I realized, oh, this is not a novel that I'm going to be able to tell the full story. Like I really saw it already as a trilogy. But I'm also a pragmatist, and so I realized like this book has to be able to stand alone, or else it doesn't matter how I see it. This is something I tell my students all the time. They're like, "Well, I'm saving that for book four." It's like, don't save it for book four. You might not ever get there. Put it in this one. You got something cool, put it in the first one. You'll come up with something better later. And so once I finished that first book, and it was a challenging book to write, and I put a lot into it, and I realized like this is my shot. This is my shot at changing the course of my career. I felt great about it. I felt like it was a book only I could write, and I had to find the right editor for it, the right publisher for it, and I knew who I wanted that to be, which was Dan Smetanka at Counterpoint Press, who had edited a bunch of books by people I love, Dan Shawn, Scott Phillips, folks like that. And fortunately for me, Dan saw what I saw, and he was like, "You realize, if this book is a success, you like the next 10 years of your life, you're gonna be writing this character." And I did. I did realize that. And the book was a huge success. And I got to write three novels and then a collection of short stories, all set in this world. And I loved doing it. It was amazing. I adapted a show for Amazon based on it. Someone else is doing that now for me. Um, but I knew pretty much from the middle of writing the book that I was on to something unusual that I thought I could spend a good deal of time on.
Yeah. And you said that there is currently stuff in the works, but nothing we can really discuss, right?
Nothing I can tell you about. I literally would have to violate an NDA,
I'm
and
okay
while
with
I
that.
love you and the listeners, just not going to do it.
I'm okay with you violating it. It's fine. All right. So let's get to the new book. However, before we get to that, did you say that the short story you have in this, which came first then? The short story or this, or you wrote this and then you wrote the short story, or like how
The
did
short
that
story
work?
came first. So
Okay.
I wrote the short story for the Left Coast crime anthology called The Killing Rain that took place in Seattle. Um, and I hadn't yet started to write the novel yet, but I wrote the short story, which I quite enjoyed. And it was a character I'd kind of used in some other stories previously that had been published in different places. Um, but I knew I wanted a character like the character that's in that story to appear in this book. And then it just sort of lined up that, oh, I could adapt what I had written to fit into this book and have it really work for me.
Yeah. And then what can you tell us, kind of give us the elevator pitch for Only Way Out?
It's about sort of the things I write about. Beautiful losers, bad people, living in resort towns. The main plot point is a failed lawyer decides to heist the safe deposit boxes at his law firm and to escape the country and the $500,000 of law school debt that he has um, with his former child prodigy sister and take all the safe deposit boxes and essentially blackmail people to get their stuff back so that he could pay for himself and also steal whatever money was in these boxes. But unfortunately, and this is no spoiler, this happens in the first 15 pages. He does just that. He heists all the safe deposit boxes, and as he's driving to meet his sister on the Oregon coast, he crashes his van filled with all the loot, cuts his head off, as happens in my books. But he does it in view of a crooked cop named Jack Biddle, who's got his own problems. And Jack Biddle takes the money and takes the body, and that starts 15 years of bad decision making.
Yeah, so this opens up basically the first about 100 pages or so is takes place like 15 years ago, and
Mhm.
then we jump forward 15 years. Like going into it, did you know that you were going to be jumping that far in time, or was that something that as you were writing it that came about? I mean, I guess well, you always said that you kind of always have the ending in mind when you
Yeah.
sit down. And are there times though where you think you have the ending in mind, and then you get to a certain place and you're like, oh, you know what? Maybe we could go a little bit of a different direction.
Oh, sure. When I say I know the ending, I know the emotional ending. I don't always know the physical ending. Like I know where I want my characters to end up, but I don't always know the process by which they're going to get there in their human form. So that's the challenge for me, and the fun part is, and I also feel like I'm better in the moment than I am thinking about the moment. So you know, trying to write what's going to happen in an entire book on one page 2 years before you write the book, that it doesn't seem like an actual good creative use of your brain. You're going to come up with better ideas, and you're going to improve as a writer as you write the book. So I knew the ending all along. How I got there for sure changed, but I always knew it was going to jump forward in time by 15 years because I wanted the sister to go to prison for this crime and come out and go looking for the money and her brother, who the world thinks is still alive, because the crooked cop stole his body and stole the loot, and people view him as like a DB Cooper kind of character who got away with an amazing heist and has become the focus of public fascination ever since.
Yeah. When you're, how do you go about keeping like a character list? Or do you kind of just get that in your head, or do you have like little post-it notes? Because, and
Um,
especially then like with the Gangsterland books, when you're writing
yeah,
more of a series, like do you kind of start your own little Bible to have reference as you go through?
for the Gangsterland books, it was hard because I wrote 4 books. I started writing the first book in 2012, and the last book came out in 2023. So there was 11 years, and all the books in my computer were 120,000 words each. So and with the short story collection, that's 4 books of 100,000 words or more. So I wrote 500,000 words about these people, plus all the stuff that I had cut, of course. Um, and so keeping some of that stuff straight was hard. I don't have a Bible. I'm able to keep most of it in my head. But you know what's really helpful? When I was writing the Gangsterland series, this is the specific thing I did. I can't stand to sit down and read my own books again. But what I can do is take a long car ride and listen to the audiobook. And that's a different experience for me. I'll tell you something funny. The same guy has narrated my books for the last 12 years. A wonderful actor named Johnny Heller has been my sort of my personal narrator, but I'd never met him in real life. We'd emailed back and forth. We'd never talked on the phone or anything. And he's narrated all these books. And then anytime I've had a short story and an anthology that had an audiobook, he's come in and done that. So he's like sort of the personal voice of my work. And I was in New York a couple weeks ago, and he lives there. And I was like, "Hey, let's meet up. I'll take you to dinner." And so we're having dinner, and he's talking. And it was the first time I realized that I could not predict what he was going to say at any time. Like I'd only ever heard him say the dialogue I'd given him. So it was a sort of disassociating out of body experience for me. Um, but I'm able to keep the stories pretty well in my head. I'm able to keep the characters pretty well. When you write a lot of different points of view, it is a little bit of a juggling act. But for me, I love that fiction allows you to shift around. And I was just having this conversation with a student of mine the other day, which is that you really saw, the multiple points of view and all of that change after The Wire came out. The Wire really changed how I think people write crime fiction. They're less likely to have a good guy and a bad guy, but just a bunch of people, and the reader's going to identify with whomever the reader identifies with, or root for whomever they root for. And The Wire did that so expertly that it naturally bled itself into fiction, but of course it bled itself into every prestige TV show subsequently. That wasn't the case for many, many years with Cops and Robbers. So
Well, I
it's
mean, Elmer
fairly easy
Leonard
for
was
me
doing that
to go. I'm
for
sorry.
a good portion. I said Elmer Leonard was sort of doing that though.
Yeah, yeah. And you see his influence also in a movie like Pulp Fiction, which was basically an Elmore Leonard novel, and then Jackie Brown, where they're shifting point of view in a way that you did not see in a lot of crime films before. More noir movies have always done it, but it's more that on a commercial level, a lot of stuff didn't. They would focus the camera or the eye of the narrator on one person, and you didn't skip around as much. But I'm able to keep it pretty straight in my own head. But I don't know how George R. R. Martin exists. I mean, other than he probably has a team of assistants, because it's so many people to remember. Like when I wrote the last Gangsterland book, Gangsters Don't Die, I was like, did that character have a kid? I think, did I kill the kid? And so like I'm scrolling through like reviews, like, is there a kid? Asking my wife, did I kill a kid in the last book? And she's like, I think you killed a kid in the second book. I was like, right. Killed a kid in the second book. And to keep fictional people alive in your head while also keeping track of the people you actually exist with, it's a lot of memory to have. It's a lot of RAM.
Yeah. Just real quick, you mentioned Jackie Brown, and the one scene in that movie that really sticks out to me, and I don't think I had actually read the Elmer Leonard novel it's based on, so I don't know if it's even similar or how he would have done it in that, was the one where I think it's what Harvey Keitel is just dropped off Jackie Brown,
Hmm.
and then he's driving home. She gets into her apartment, and there's that guy there, and then the screen kind of splits. So we're
Yeah,
seeing his point of view and her point of view because he then goes to reach for his gun. His gun's not there right as she pulls the gun up. And it
right.
just was one of those things where, one of those things that like you can do in film, but you really
Hmm.
can't pull that off well in fiction.
Yeah.
And then there are some things that you can pull off in fiction that you can't really do well in film TV. So it's always,
Yeah, and Steven Soderbergh did that really well in the Elmore Leonard adaptation of Out of Sight. He would shift between characters like that, doing things that were tied together with one another.
I haven't seen
Um,
that in a long time. I have to go back and rewatch
oh,
that.
it's so good. George Clooney, for me, it's weird, because I look so much like him, and so watching him in Out of Sight, it's like, oh, there I am doing my thing. But I get past it. I'm able to
Yeah.
I'm able to see past that resemblance and enjoy the film. I love it. It's one of my top five all-time favorite films.
Well, speaking of recommendations, I usually try to end with, was there anything recently you've read, you've watched, you listened to that you really like that you would recommend to other people?
Oh gosh, a ton. I just loved Susan Straight's most recent novel, Sacrament, which is an amazing, luminous novel that takes place in the Inland Empire of Southern California. It's sort of a sequel, but not really, to her previous book, Mecca. Um, I love The Savage Noble Death of Babs Dion by Ron Curry. I love that. Great, great crime novel. I love The Gossip Columnist's Daughter by Pete Werner, that came out a few months ago. That's great. So I love those. What have I been listening to? Hold on, let me think here. Well, last night I had to stay up late and watch Jason Isbell and Drive By Truckers on the Colbert Show, as I mentioned earlier. So I've been listening to the reissue of their Decoration Day record, which I am very fond of. Um, Yesterday I bought a Reese's Oreo cup. I'd never had one of those before.
Was it good?
So I'm glad you asked that. I sometimes film myself eating these weird Reese's concoctions that you see, like they're like the giant cup and it's some new flavor, and you're like, can't I just get chocolate and peanut butter? I don't need this other shit. But I was like, all right, I'm gonna try the Oreo one. Robert, it was delicious. It was absolutely delicious. It's a disgusting color. It's basically the color of dog shit left outside in the sun for a month, but delicious.
Well, as long as it's delicious, doesn't have,
Yeah.
doesn't matter what it looks like.
And what have I been watching? Oh, I've been watching Task. I loved Task, and I just
Task
started
was good.
watching Pluribus. So I've been enjoying that. And have I seen any good movies lately? I have a bunch of screeners to watch, so I typically catch up an entire year's worth of movies in December when my school year is over and I have all the free time. So I haven't seen a ton of movies this year, but a lot of TV.
Yeah, it was interesting. Task got renewed for a second season. I'm curious to see what they do because it was one of those shows where it was like, it was kind of like Mayor of Easttown. It's like
Yeah.
perfect. Don't do it again. Which supposedly that Kate Winslet said that she's always been open to come back. So there's I don't know how serious it is, but they've talked about maybe a rumor of like a Task Mayor of Easttown crossover because essentially
Hmm.
it's in the same
Yeah,
Delco area.
right. Yeah, and
Um,
I loved Mayor of Easttown too. The advantage of Task is Mayor of Easttown devolved into such unbelievable police work and such unbelievable stupidity on the part of every single character in the last three episodes that I and every crime writer that I know was texting each other saying, hold on a minute. She framed a guy and they just let her stay on the police force. Like she dropped a gun on someone. Her cousin, like there was all this absurd shit that happened in the last couple episodes. And so I was worried that Task would devolve into that same thing, but it didn't. And it was so good. And Tom Pelphrey was just remarkable in that. And I love a fat, disheveled Mark Ruffalo. Like, yes, more fat,
I,
disheveled Mark Ruffalo.
I saw him in an interview where he talked about at like at the beginning of when they started filming, he had to wear sort of a fat suit, and then towards the
Hmm.
end, he didn't really have to wear that fat suit as much because there was, he was getting all the food down in that area. Oh, you know what? Before we go, you recently edited an anthology,
Hmm.
Eight Very Bad Nights. Can you talk about, was this the very first anthology you had edited?
Yeah. So I've been in lots of anthologies over the years, and I was in an anthology for Soho Press called The Usual Santas, which was an anthology of Christmas noir. And I was one of like two Jews that were in it. And so I had said to my editor at Soho, and Soho had published a previous book of mine many years ago. They'd published Living Dead Girl, so I had a relationship with the press. But I had said sort of jokingly, like, "Hey, we should do a Hanukkah anthology." And my editor, Juliet Grames, was like, "Great, let me call your agent." And I was like, "Oh, oh, I'm we're doing a Hanukkah anthology." And uh, she said, "Yeah, we're doing a Hanukkah anthology." And so I put together sort of a dream list of people I wanted to write in the book. I thought it'd be fun for readers. My brother and I have never been in a book before. And so I had my brother in the book, and I filled it with just a lot of good friends like Gabino Iglesias and Ivy Pacoda, David Ewan, Lisa Jacobs, Jim Ruland, and then writers that I didn't really know very well personally, but whose short fiction I really loved, like Nikki Dolson, James D.F. Hanna. And I said to them, like, hey, I want this to be dark, weird, and funny. And some of them were like, well, I'm not Jewish. So I was like, I don't care if you're Jewish or not. Like, it just has to happen during Hanukkah. And for reasons I am unaware of, that book just blew up. It got covered everywhere. It sold great. Three of the stories that were in the anthology ended up in Best American. It was just a huge, profound success. And it was a delight for me because I got to do this cool thing with my brother. But here's the downside. I said to my brother, "Hey man, short story. I'd like it to be about 7,000 words, and let's not go crazy with like sex. Like kills many people, but like I want to keep this funny and not X-rated." He's like, "Yeah, yeah, no problem." So a month later, he sends me his short story. It's 45 pages long, and there's three graphic sex scenes in there where every orifice is utilized. And I was like, Lee, I told you 7,000 words and please no sex. And he was like, hey, you're the editor, edit it. I was like, this is not like this is a therapy appointment. Editing my brother's sex scenes is a therapy appointment. But it was a lot of fun. I love doing that book. It's insanely popular. They just released a new collector's edition that just came out with this beautiful, I have a copy somewhere, this beautiful gold cover. And on the inside, there's a dreidel on every page. And if you flip it, it's actually a flip book, and the dreidel spins. So Soho really did a remarkable job on the book. And I was just in their offices a couple weeks ago because I was in New York, and I said, hey, I got an idea. New Hanukkah anthology. And they said, okay. And I said, two words. Mazel tough. And they were like, let's think about it.
We'll run it by marketing. So when you were so when you were editing it, did you, there's always, I mean, God, it's been over a decade now, even probably much longer than that. I had done an anthology for W. Norton, which was a more of a flash fiction, microfiction type thing. Like,
hmm
so, but it always really, I don't know, it always really fascinates me. Like what type of thought process went into more like laying out the stories? Like, did you have, I mean, I'm assuming it wasn't just like laid out by like alphabetical order. Like you wanted,
No.
certain story and then this, I mean, yeah, like, can
Yeah.
you talk about that process?
Yeah. There's a wonderful essay by a writer named David Jauss, Jauss, called Stacking Stones. And it's about how to put together short stories, short story collections, essentially. And I've published three short story collections over the course of my career, so I have experience in sort of the idea of stacking the stones of short stories of my own, so that the novel or that so that the collection itself reads emotionally like a novel might, where there's ups and downs and ebbs and flows dramatically, and put a funny story next to a serious story, or stories that have different or similar themes. Try not to have them be too close together, that sort of thing. That's easier when it's your own work. In this case, it really was like, okay, this story ends on this kind of beat. What do I want to do for the next one? So Juliet Graham's, my editor, and I sort of sat down with the 11 stories and said, okay, let's start stacking these stones. Like this one fits in here, and this one fits in here, and that sort of enjams that. And I also had to make sure that I kept my story and my brother's story far away from each other so they wouldn't realize that essentially we share one genetic code, except Lee's has more sex in it. Um, and so that was all a big fun challenge for me, and it really gave me the itch to do another anthology. It's a lot more work than you would imagine. I'm sure you know, but not unlike writing the book with Brad Meltzer, where I thought, oh, this would be a quick, fun thing. It's like, oh no, this is going to take 9 months of your life to get this all done. But I loved it, and people really responded extraordinarily well to that book. So I hope I get the chance to do it again.
Yeah. I mean, in my case, I had also open submissions.
Oh yeah, I'd
So
never do that.
that was that was yeah, that was an experience. So real
Yeah,
quick, I
I already
see.
read applications to an MFA program, so I'm not. I don't need to read other people's submissions ever for anything ever.
Yeah. So real quick, Salton Sea. Can you tell us anything about Salton Sea? Is that I guess a book coming out next year?
Yeah, I have to finish writing it.
Okay.
So it probably won't come out next year. It was supposed to, but then I put that off because I'm working on this show that we talked about earlier. It is about organized crime at the Salton Sea in the 1960s. It's based off of my short story, The Low Desert and The Salt, which have both appeared in my book of the same name, The Low Desert. And it's this idea that I've had for a very long time about exploring um, the genesis of the Salton Sea, which is this dying inland sea here in Southern California that was created as part of a sort of widespread grift and has persisted as sort of a widespread grift over the course of the last 115 years.
Yeah. And then I'm sorry, one other question while I'm thinking about it. You mentioned
Sure.
with Gangsterland having to read all those books really to get into like, do you do a lot of research or do you try not to let research kind of get in the way of your story and characters?
No, no, I do a lot because I always want to know what my characters know. And even if it's just for a sentence, I'll do a bunch of the research just so I have that sentence. And then of course my editor will be like, "What the cut?" Like, oh, I spent 9 hours looking up that. I'm like, yeah, cut. So your editors don't care. But no, like, I'm sitting here in my office in the nonfiction portion of my office. The fiction's over there, and I read a ton of nonfiction. I just read this amazing book called the CIA Book Club, which is about how we flooded Eastern Europe with books essentially to combat communism, and to fight off the Russians in Poland and things like that. And I don't know how I'm ever going to use that information, but I love this idea of the American government using novels to affect social change in some other country. So maybe there's something I steal from that at some point in my mind, but I just like knowing this big stuff. I read a ton of nonfiction. I'm one of those guys that wakes up in the morning and lays in bed and reads, five different newspapers. That's the one great joy of the iPhone next to the bed is I can wake up and I can read the New York Times, the LA Times, and the Washington Post before even sitting upright.
All right, Todd. I don't want to keep any more of your time. I know you have a stacked day of other interviews, so I want to make sure you have time to use the potty between the next interview.
Thank you.
So the
Thank
new
you for
book
releasing me to
is
the potty.
only way out. Just recently was released. Hardcover, paperback, ebook, audiobook, narrated. You said by Johnny Heller. Obviously, if people wanted to stalk you online, where's the best place to do that?
I tend to spend most of my time on Threads and on Facebook and Instagram. And you can find me just by looking for my name, Tod Goldberg.
All right. All right. So again, Todd, congratulations on the new book. Congratulations on
Thank you.
the new TV news that was just announced today. Which I think I did see it in Deadline. It was in Deadline, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So yeah, that is always exciting. So
It's a good day. It's been a good
yeah.
day.
So I was glad I can be a part of it, just to, just on this, on the peripheral. So
I
all
appreciate
right.
you
So
having me.
anyway, thanks again, and yeah, we'll see everybody next time. Bye.